1. A letter. She wrote but never sent, 250 words. That morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee long gone cold. The Nushto letter I had drafted the night before lay in my hands, unmailed. I stared at the words I'd written, not for sharing, but as a reckoning. This isn't revenge. This is the natural consequence of underestimating a woman you erased. The house was quiet, and through the window, I watched movers carrying Galatia's belongings out with deliberate care. The gears I'd set in motion were turning. My letter was the release valve. I reread the line my therapist once shared. Forgiveness is not about them. It's about what you're willing to carry. I understood now. Holding on to bitterness weighed me down. Instead, I chose clarity. I smiled gently, feeling lighter, thinking, I'm not carrying anything they gave me anymore. The fire crackled softly in the background, and without hesitation, I placed the letter upright in the fireplace unlit. I didn't need to burn what was already gone, just let it exist, and then let it go. 2. The final exit. When the liars returned to the scene, 300 words. Just before midday, the court officer arrived, followed by Galatia and Onyx, both flanked by their attorneys. The air seemed to shift. Galatia wore oversized sunglasses, too big for the courtroom, silent, expressionless. Onyx trailed, hands clasped, looking small. I stood in the foyer near the mantel, coffee gone, letter, now ashes, waiting to happen. They entered with quiet confidence, as though the house recognized them and welcomed them back. But it didn't. I greeted them evenly. No warmth, no bitterness, just presence. Galatia approached a mantel shelf and reached for a framed photo. I stepped in her path gently but firmly. That one, I said, voice steady, belongs to the original owner. The court officer made a note. Galatia's lips parted. You really think you've won? She finally murmured, not loud enough to challenge me, but enough to spit her disbelief. I looked at her, the picture of composure. No, I said. I know I've finished. Silence followed. The house felt different, less contested and more whole. Energetically, every step felt like reclaiming territory they never truly owned. They packed boxes in stiff, mechanical movements, carrying only objects. Nothing of real value remained. I stood by, steady, not to gloat, just to witness the final act of their false narrative being physically removed. 3. The power shift, made public. 300 words. That afternoon, as I stood in the living room sipping a second cup of tea, my phone chimed. A notification. A local news site had published an article titled, The Woman Who Took Back Her Name and Her Home. The article spread fast within online circles. Feminist blogs, adult-child estrangement forums, legal justice threads. I didn't write it. Calliope had on my behalf. I read carefully. My heart lifted, not with pity, but with resonance. The last line stayed with me. They called her invisible. Now they call her precedent. Bram was mentioned, though not quoted. Galatia was labeled unavailable for comment. It felt restful, right? Emails arrived soon after, donors and community members offering support. We believe you. We've been you. One volunteer wrote, Thank you for showing strength in silence. I responded quietly, grateful but no longer reactive. The house felt lighter. The phone buzzed again. Calls, not threats. This was affirmation, not alarm. 4. A legacy of her own making. 200 words. In the evening's golden light, I walked room to room. Soft music played. The walls showed traces of transition, new coats of paint over where their tastes had once dominated. I hung a childhood photo of me and Mom above the mantel, smiling. Below it, I placed a small brass nameplate, Eulalia's daughter. Homeowner. Quiet pride. Outside, I planted a modest sapling in the yard. Nothing dramatic, just a tree that would grow, persist beyond any narrative or hurt. I thought, they had a legacy of image. I built one of truth. There's no flash, no big reveal, just the steady accumulation of quiet acts. By dusk, I sat by the window, sipping tea. I breathed in. No tension, No regrets. Just belonging. 5. Cliffhanger. Unwritten stories. 150 words. A week later, a crisp envelope arrived, postmarked from a National Women's Rights Conference. Inside was an invitation. Keynote speaker slot. I unfolded it and let a small smile appear. Not because I wanted to lead a movement, but because my voice, once trained for silence, could now save others. I placed the invitation gently on my desk, beside the Real Things box that held Verity's letter, the pressed flower, and my unsent note. I whispered, "They tried to take the house, but I kept the home." I leaned back, eyes soft, no words needed. But the next chapter wasn't mine to write in full. It would belong to others who found strength in my story. The scent of cinnamon hit me before I even made it to the front steps. Mariah Carey was already belting her yearly anthem from inside the house, loud enough for the whole block to know Galatea was hosting. Again. The Victorian windows gleamed with faux snow, gold ribbon garlands looped perfectly around the columns. No detail left untouched. Everything was staged, polished, posed, like always. I stepped up, smoothing my sweater, careful not to scuff the freshly salted walkway. I wasn't late, but I wasn't early either. Right on time for my traditional role, invisible participant. I opened the door and was greeted not by a person, but a camera. Galatea's phone, mounted on a tripod in the foyer, was already live. She didn't even look up as I entered. "Oh, great, you're here," she said, eyes still glued to her screen, adjusting the angle. "We just started streaming the pre-dinner segment. Smile if you're going to hover in the background." I gave a half smile. Not for the stream. But for me, the kind of smile you give when you know you'll need it to hold you up later. The house was immaculate. Matching napkins, crystalware, a curated tree in the corner, lights set to twinkle every 4.5 seconds. Galatea had this down to a science. She wasn't hosting Christmas dinner, she was producing it. I found a seat near the far end of the table, half a mile from the camera. I didn't expect warmth, I just needed peace. I had rehearsed my lines, my small talk, the polite nods. I was here to keep the peace. That was the role assigned to me long ago. Dinner started innocently. Light banter about work, kids, the weather, standard holiday filler. But like always, the real script emerged after the wine had time to settle. Galatea raised her glass. "You know what I'm grateful for this year?" she said, voice bright and deadly. "That we all know our place. Some give, some just show up." I stiffened. That smile I stored, gone. Onyx chuckled. Bram, our father, cleared his throat. I looked at him, just for a second, searching for the man who once taught me to ride a bike, but he was already leaning forward, pointing a finger in my direction. "You know," he said, "she's right. I don't know what you do with your time. You've always been a taker, not a giver." The air left my lungs. A beat passed. Then another. "You're a parasite," Bram added. And then the room went still. No clinks, no gasps, just his hand cutting through the air and slamming across my face. I didn't stumble. I didn't flinch. I just stood there. I heard Verity, my niece, sucking in her breath. But no one moved. No one said my name. The sting on my cheek burned, but my insides were colder. I thought of something I once read. You can survive anything if you let it shatter you quietly. I nodded slowly, then looked around the room. The people I once called family couldn't even meet my gaze. Galatea approached, her tone soft, false concern painted on every syllable. "Maybe you should go. You're upsetting everyone." She didn't mean the party, she meant the narrative, the one where I was always the problem. No one contradicted her, not Bram, not Onyx. Even Verity looked away. Someone handed me my coat. "Don't come back until you fix yourself," I heard someone mutter. I didn't even try to identify who. It didn't matter anymore. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I walked out, coat half-zipped, shoes missing, heart numb. Snow crunched under my feet as I stepped onto the sidewalk. The bite of winter air caught my throat, but I welcomed it. At least it was honest. Unlike the people behind that door. I walked. Just walked. past houses with glowing reindeer on their lawns, past strangers clinking glasses through frosted windows. This wasn't just a Christmas ruined, it was the confirmation of everything I had suspected but never wanted to believe. That house, the one they pushed me out of, it had my name on the deed. I kept that quiet, not out of fear, but because I believed peace mattered more than pride. I thought staying silent made me noble. Turns out, it just made me a target. As I kept walking, snow slowly filled in my footprints behind me. It erased every trace of where I had been, as if I never existed at all. I watched the sidewalk vanish behind me, and I felt the truth hit me harder than the slap ever could. I was always meant to be the shadow in their story. I reached the edge of town. A single motel sign flickered ahead, a beacon for the discarded. I stepped inside, the warmth of the lobby brushing against the frozen air, still clinging to my coat. The clerk didn't ask questions, just slid me a key and said, "Merry Christmas." I almost laughed, but I didn't have the energy. Inside the room, the heater wheezed, the light buzzed, and the air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old regrets. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulled out my phone. No missed calls, no texts. I opened my photo gallery and stared at a picture of my mother. Her eyes always looked sad, even when she smiled. I wondered if she had felt this invisible too. Then I opened a folder on my phone, one I never thought I'd need. The deed, my name, the signature, the proof. "They think I have nothing," I whispered. "They've always thought that." I reached into my bag and pulled out my laptop. I didn't open any files, not yet. I just stared at the blank screen, fingers hovering above the keyboard. Then I began typing, not a resignation from my job, a resignation from the role they assigned me in this family. The room smelled like disinfectant and overused air conditioning. The curtains didn't quite meet in the middle, letting in slivers of cold morning light. I sat on the edge of the lumpy motel bed, feet tucked beneath me, staring at the bruised reflection in the cracked mirror above the dresser. The welt across my cheek had settled into a dull, yellowing purple, ugly, but no longer shocking. The lamp buzzed quietly. My blanket was too thin for the weather outside, and my hands had gone numb sometime in the night. I didn't sleep, not really, just drifted between images of what happened, what was said, who said nothing. I pulled my phone out from under the pillow and scrolled through the photos from Christmases past. In every one of them, Galatea stood front and center. Even in shots where I had been there first, she found a way to insert herself, big and shining. I was either cropped out or positioned just off-center, smiling too politely, wearing sweaters she picked for me. A quote my old therapist once shared floated up from nowhere. "Sometimes the ones who claim to know you best are the ones who see you least." That was my family's talent. They didn't just overlook me, they studied how to erase me gently. I closed the gallery and tapped into my inbox. No apologies, no messages at all, nothing from Bram, nothing from Galatea, not even a half-hearted text from Onyx. I wasn't surprised, but the silence still made my chest tighten. Their silence was never an absence. It was a tool. I put the phone down and stood slowly, legs stiff. The carpet felt sticky against my bare feet. I glanced at the clock. 10:14 a.m. Portland had already moved on. Cars passed on the road outside. My family was probably finishing brunch by now, maybe posting about it. As if on cue, my phone buzzed, a notification from Galatea's Instagram. I knew better, but I opened it anyway. The caption read, "Back to peace. No drama this year. Just love and family." My jaw clenched. There she was, smiling with Bram, Onyx, and Verity around the Christmas tree. The same tree I decorated 3 years in a row when no one else wanted to. The same fireplace above which hung the painting I had gifted Bram before Galatea claimed it as hers. And then I saw the comment. From my cousin's daughter, just beneath the photo. "Mom said the parasite finally left." It was tagged with Verity's name, Verity, my 9-year-old niece. I froze, not from the cold air seeping into the room, but from the ice settling in my stomach. My thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't know whether to scream or sob. Instead, I reread it, again and again. She was just a child. She didn't invent the word. She heard it, repeated it, like a parrot, like any child would, because that's how legacy works, doesn't it? Hatred isn't born, it's inherited. I put the phone down and closed my eyes, gripping the edge of the mattress so hard my knuckles whitened. It wasn't about the word, it was about how easily they handed it to her. How comfortable they were using it when I wasn't around. How long they had been using it while I was still showing up, still helping, still pretending we were ever family. I picked up the phone again. My first instinct was to respond, to call Galatea and let her have it, to demand Bram explain himself, to message Onyx and ask what kind of man lets his wife weaponize a child like that. But I didn't. Instead, I opened my notes app, created a new entry, titled it, What They Don't Know. Then I sat down at the tiny desk under the motel's flickering lamp, opened my journal, and began to write. Not about what they did, but about what I'd do next. Words spilled fast. They think silence means surrender, but silence is just the breath before the scream, the still before the fire. I am not a parasite. And I am the root. I paused, fingers hovering above the keys. Another quote came to mind, something I'd read in a book years ago and never forgot. People will build entire lies just to justify the way they treat you. That's what they'd done. They built a whole world where I didn't count, so they wouldn't have to feel guilty for cutting me out. But guilt wasn't my concern anymore. I didn't post a response. I didn't text anyone. Let them believe I was broken. Let them think I'd vanished. Let them celebrate the version of me they created, quiet, weak, dependent. Because when people think you have nothing left to lose, they stop watching what you're doing. And I was done watching. I was planning. I bundled my things into my tote, careful, deliberate. No emotion, just steps. My movements were calm, but each one packed with something harder to name, a knowing, a shift. Before I left the room, I took one last look in the mirror. The bruise was still there. But it didn't sting anymore. It reminded me of who hit me, of who laughed, of who stood still. I stepped outside into the snow, squinting against the white sun. The air was sharp, but it didn't cut like it did yesterday. Across the street, down the hill, their house stood tall. From this distance, it looked almost picturesque. Galatea's silhouette visible on the porch, laughing, holding a cup of coffee. Onyx waved at someone in a passing car. Bram sat on a chair near the edge of the lawn, pretending he wasn't shivering under a coat that didn't quite fit. Verity skipped in circles. They didn't know I was watching. Galatea pulled out her phone and aimed it toward the group. Another photo for the internet. Another version of truth they would package and send to the world. They waved at the lens. From my angle, it looked like they were waving at me. I didn't wave back. Let them smile in my house. Let them toast to my absence. The snow would cover their footsteps too soon enough. But I was done being erased. The winter is long. So is memory. The snow had stopped, but the cold hadn't. I pulled the collar of my coat tighter around my neck as I made my way down the block. It was still early. Not many people out yet, just the mail carrier dragging his feet up the street and a kid on a bike with training wheels slipping and laughing alone. The sidewalks looked cleaner than I remembered. Or maybe emptier. Each step back toward that street felt like reopening a chapter I didn't want to reread. The houses were the same, but something about them had shifted. Maybe it was me. Maybe the realization that I had never belonged in this narrative had finally settled somewhere permanent in my chest. When I reached the corner, I could see the house. My house, quiet, smug in its Victorian pride, windows covered in frost. From the outside, nothing looked out of place. Perfect paint job, clean wreath, no visible rot. But from where I stood, it might as well have been a museum built on a lie. The sidewalk leading up to the driveway hadn't been shoveled yet. I passed it and continued down the block to where I had left my car, parked discreetly under a street lamp. The windshield was a frozen sheet. I took out a plastic scraper from the trunk and started chipping at it. It felt oddly symbolic, trying to see clearly through layers that didn't belong there. Once inside, I sat for a moment, not starting the engine. My breath fogged the glass in little rhythmic bursts. My fingers tapped against the steering wheel, not from cold, but from something heavier. I reached over and opened the glove box, pulling out a notebook. Mom notes, written in her handwriting. I had tossed it there months ago after she passed. I don't know why I brought it with me that night. Habit, maybe, or hope. I opened it. Page after page of half-finished grocery lists, quotes she liked, memories jotted down like they were about to be forgotten. Then one entry, circled in pen. Families don't fall apart from shouting. They fall apart when no one dares speak. I stared at that line for a long time. The last time she and I were alone, it had been winter too. She had wrapped herself in 3 shawls and sat on the porch like she owned the cold. I brought her tea, chamomile with honey, and sat next to her in silence. She turned to me that day and said, "Don't provoke your sister. You know how she gets." I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the steam curling from the mug in my hands. She continued, "Sometimes keeping the peace is the strongest thing you can do." I remember forcing a nod, but inside, something cracked, because what she called peace, I had begun to understand as submission, not strength, just survival. She never said those things in front of Galatea, never corrected her, never told Bram to back off. But in private, she'd hold my hand and tell me I mattered, that she saw me, that I was just built differently, and not everyone gets that, but comfort behind closed doors doesn't erase cruelty in the open. As I closed the notebook and placed it on the passenger seat, I felt the familiar tug of war inside me. Was she protecting me? Or enabling them? The answer, I feared, was both. I flipped down the visor and stared at the reflection in the mirror. The bruise was less angry today, more muted, but still there, hugging my cheekbone like a shadow that wouldn't quite lift. I tilted my head, watching how the swelling had faded but left a trace. Like all the things that had ever been said and then dismissed with a laugh. A bruise no one in my family would ask about, because asking would mean acknowledging. I briefly debated going to urgent care, but I knew how that would go. How did this happen? Why didn't you come sooner? Do you feel safe at home? That last one would be the kicker. What even was home? Instead, I took a photo. Not for Instagram, not for sympathy, just for myself, a record, a receipt, of the truth that would never be spoken out loud. I stared into the lens as I took it. No filters, no smile, just a woman refusing to be erased. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. I let my hand fall back into my lap and leaned against the headrest. The pattern had been there for years. I could name them like coordinates on a map. The time Galatea corrected me in front of a room full of guests about a story I'd lived. The way Bram would tell people I worked part-time at a hobby shop when I was running outreach for a nonprofit that had tripled in size under my leadership. The way Onyx called me kiddo in front of lawyers, like I was a 12-year-old asking for allowance. Every moment small on its own, but together they were a fortress of denial, of control, of making sure I never stood tall enough to cast a shadow on their version of events. I called it emotional erosion. Not a single landslide, just bits of me chipped away until all that was left was compliance. I thought of a quote from Maya Angelou I'd underlined in one of my journals. "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." That's what I was carrying. Not a single tragedy, but 100 silent ones. Bruises no one saw. Betrayals that were never loud enough to matter. I picked up my phone and opened my notes app. Typed a new heading. Emotional ledger. First line. December 24th, called a parasite, in a house with my name on the deed. I kept typing. December 25th, niece repeated it. Not her fault. She learned it from them. December 26th. I remembered Mom's silence. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was fear. The list grew. Every entry a reclaiming. Every word a whisper I refused to let die unheard. The car was quiet, engine still off. Outside, a light flurry began again, dancing across the windshield in patterns too gentle for the heaviness inside me. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text. From Lyra, an old coworker from my nonprofit days. "Hey, weird question. Did you know your name's still listed as the owner of the Moreland house?" I stared at the screen. The cold inside me started to shift. Not warmth, but clarity. They called me a parasite. But the roots they grew, they were in soil I owned. I stayed in the car for a long time after work, parked under a dim streetlight near the loading dock. The dashboard clock ticked forward slowly, but I wasn't ready to drive home or to that motel that didn't feel like much of anything. My hands rested on the steering wheel, still except for my thumbs, which tapped in a rhythm that matched the storm quietly building inside me. Lyra's text from earlier played over in my mind. "You're still listed as the owner of the Moreland house." That one sentence had cracked something open, and what came pouring out wasn't relief. It was memory. Memory I hadn't wanted to examine, hadn't had the space to process. But now it came forward, unwanted and unrelenting. I reached into the glove compartment, rifling through a tangle of old receipts and expired insurance cards until my fingers brushed against the envelope. Thick, beige, sealed. My name written in Mom's handwriting. I had never opened it. Not because I forgot, because I chose not to. And because pretending things were fine meant I didn't have to acknowledge what wasn't. I placed it gently on the passenger seat, still unopened. A reminder that even when she was alive, I had trained myself not to ask too many questions. 6 months ago, we buried her. Galatea had insisted on giving the eulogy. "I already have something drafted," she said, brushing past me in the hallway the night before the service. "Nothing dramatic, just clean and simple. People need comfort, not chaos." I'd offered her the paragraph I had written. Just a few lines. Something about how Mom used to hum when she cooked, how her hands never stopped moving, even when she was bone-tired. Galatea skimmed it and said, "It's sweet, but it doesn't fit the tone." The next day, I sat in the third pew, legs crossed, hands folded. My name wasn't spoken once. She spoke of Mom's grace, her love of community, her resilience. She thanked Dad, thanked Onyx, mentioned how close they had all been. But me, I was edited out like a typo. When she finished, the room clapped softly, and Dad beamed at her like she had read a poem she wrote herself. Afterward, no one asked why I hadn't spoken. No one noticed, or maybe they did, and silence was easier. That moment, sitting in that pew, invisible while grieving, was when I understood that silence wasn't just absence in my family, it was architecture. A structure carefully built to support the myth that only one voice mattered, and that voice had never been mine. I turned the key in the ignition, but didn't drive. The heater coughed and sputtered. I leaned back, staring out at the soft halo of snow beginning to form again on the windshield. My fingers itched for something, a response, a plan, a reckoning. Instead, I remembered another time, 2 years ago, Christmas morning. I had spent weeks working on a gift for Dad, a watercolor family portrait. I stayed up late blending colors, making sure I got the lines of his face just right. No signature. I figured he'd know it was mine. Who else painted in the family? I placed it beneath the tree at Galatea's house before anyone woke. It felt personal, intimate, a reminder that I still wanted to be seen. When the gift exchange began, Dad unwrapped it slowly. His eyes widened just a little, his version of surprised. Before he could say anything, Galatea's voice cut in. "I thought Dad would love something from my friend's studio. Had it commissioned weeks ago." And just like that, the portrait stopped being mine. Dad smiled, held it up. "Now this is real art." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out, not even a breath. I watched as they all nodded, as he thanked Galatea, as she sipped her mimosa and winked at me like it was all just a joke. That painting now hangs over the fireplace in the house I legally own, but no one knows that, because I let them take it. Just like the eulogy, just like the room, just like my voice. In the break room at work, I didn't tell anyone what happened. When a coworker asked if I was okay, I lied. "Just holiday fatigue," I said, smiling like it hadn't been rehearsed 100 times. Then I sat in the corner with my tea, pulled out my notebook, and opened to a fresh page. At the top I wrote, "Incidents of being erased." Below it, "Memorial speech omission, painting credit stolen, voice dismissed during Mom's hospice care, Dad's financial advisor assuming Galatea was my proxy." I kept going. No tears, just bullet points, documentation, evidence, control. They didn't just want me quiet, they wanted me gone. And I had let it happen, piece by piece. I remembered a quote I came across once in a courtroom transcript. When they no longer expect you to speak, that's when you must scream, quietly, with facts. It settled into my chest like a vow. When I left work that evening, the sky was dark, but the snow gave everything a soft glow. I crossed the lot slowly, watching my breath cloud in front of me. As I approached my car, I noticed the SUV parked across the street. Luxury, charcoal gray, barely frosted, engine still warm. I paused behind a parked sedan and waited. The driver's side door opened. Onyx stepped out, glanced around, then walked toward the blue USPS drop box on the corner. He carried a large envelope in his gloved hands. No hesitation, just business. He slipped it into the box, glanced at his phone, and returned to the car. Didn't even see me. I waited until he drove off. The street was empty. I crossed, opened the USPS slot, and reached in. The envelope was still there, barely slid down the chute. I pulled it out slowly, my name on the label, misspelled, Althea Valmeyer. I laughed once, bitterly. Even when they tried to erase me, they couldn't even get that right. I tucked the envelope into my bag and stood there under the dim street lamp, letting the cold seep in through my coat. They thought I wouldn't notice, but this time, I wasn't going to let that envelope reach its destination unchallenged. By the time I got home, the streetlights had blinked on and the air had settled into that wet, chill Portland always wrapped around you like a passive-aggressive hug. I dropped my bag at the door, turned on the space heater, and sat on the edge of my bed with the envelope I'd fished out of the mailbox still in my hands. The misspelling, Althea Valmeyer, was almost poetic. Even when they tried to manipulate the system, they couldn't be bothered to get my name right. I booted up my laptop, opened my online banking, and froze. My access was denied. A red error message flashed. Account temporarily restricted. I clicked again. Nothing changed. Tried the mobile app. Same result. I called the bank, waited 15 minutes. When someone finally picked up, I gave my information, explained the problem. Miss Valmey, I'm seeing a hold placed due to a pending documentation update on file. It's a joint account, correct? It used to be, I said slowly. Years ago. I haven't touched that in ages. Yes, but your co-signer submitted updated credentials. We can't provide more details over the phone, but you can visit any branch for clarity. Co-signer? I asked. Who exactly submitted that documentation? I'm afraid I can't confirm that here. You'll need to come in with valid ID. I hung up without saying goodbye. They never stole the money. They stole access. I stood up, paced the room, staring at the walls like they held an answer I hadn't earned. My mind kept returning to Eulalia's signature. The power of attorney. That tiny clause she signed, probably thinking it would simplify things if she got too sick to manage finances. I hadn't wanted to touch any of her accounts while she was alive. It felt invasive, like I was trying to anticipate her end. Galatea, of course, had no such hesitation. They counted on me not fighting, not asking, not checking. My absence was convenient. My silence, bankable. I opened the window just enough to let in the winter air and sat back down. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I whispered to no one. Abusers don't always take your money. Sometimes, they take your ability to use it. And then they dare you to ask why you're struggling. The next morning, I walked into the credit union. No appointment, no smile. The young teller at the counter looked up and said, "Welcome back, Ms. Valmey. What can I help you with?" "I need to see a copy of every access change on this account," I said, sliding my ID across the glass. Printed, dated, signed. He hesitated, then excused himself. 10 minutes passed. Then a woman with silver-rimmed glasses approached and introduced herself as a manager. "If you'll step over here with me, I'll bring you the documentation." We sat in a side room, glass-walled, just enough to look transparent without offering any real privacy. She handed me a small folder. Inside, a record showing Onyx Prater had submitted an update using power of attorney. Attached was a digital scan of my mother's signature, dated months before she passed. Clean, legal, but sickening. She never told me, I said, more to myself than anyone else. Ms. Valmay, the manager said gently, I understand this might come as a surprise, but the paperwork is valid. If you believe it was used outside its intended scope, you'll need to speak with a legal advisor. I nodded. Of course it was valid. That was the trap. That was the genius of their timing. They planned this before she even died. When someone expects your silence, they write your future for you. I thanked her, walked back to the car, and sat motionless in the driver's seat for a while. That afternoon, after making it through 2 nonprofit meetings and replying to a dozen unread emails, I got tagged in a photo on Instagram. A mutual friend from the community center had reposted Galatia's Christmas family photo. I clicked on it. The original post was still up. Galatia, Bram, Onyx, and Verity. Sitting around the fireplace in my house, the caption read, "Finally a peaceful Christmas. No more drama." I stared at it. The comments were predictable. You deserve peace, sis. Family is what you make it. So happy you've moved on from toxic energy. I didn't feel hurt. Not exactly. That part of me had gone quiet days ago. What I felt now was clarity. They painted me out, so I'd redraw the canvas. I screenshot everything. The next hour passed in silence as I combed through old emails, cross-referenced bank statements, and pulled records. Then I crafted a short message. I wrote it slowly. No flourishes, no pleasantries. Subject line, legal notice. Body, to Galatia Moreland, Onyx Prater, and Bram Calder. Do not contact me moving forward unless through legal representation. Any future interference with financial accounts or assets under my name will be documented and pursued accordingly. You do not have my consent to act on my behalf in any capacity, effective immediately. Alethea Valmay. I hit send. Then I blocked all 3. Phone, email, social, everything. Next, I created a folder on my desktop. Timeline of events, ownership dispute. It wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition. They trained me to keep the peace. Now I'd teach them the cost of war. I didn't even feel the weight of it until I closed the laptop and realized I could breathe easier. That night, just before dinner, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from an unknown number. I almost didn't check it, but something about the timestamp pulled me in. I hit play. Hi, Alethea? My name's June. I used to live next door to your mom before she passed. I don't mean to intrude, but I found something in my attic that I think belongs to you. It's addressed to you in your mother's handwriting, and honestly, I didn't feel right holding on to it. My number's on this message if you want to call me back. Her tone was soft, unpracticed, not rehearsed. I stared at the screen long after the message ended. They erased me from the will, from the photos, from the memories, I said out loud, voice even. But maybe Mom left something behind they couldn't touch. The road to the storage unit felt longer than it should have, maybe because I hadn't driven this far east in over a year, or maybe because every intersection felt like a checkpoint through some part of a life I hadn't wanted to revisit. By the time I reached the industrial strip where the units sat like metal tombs, the air had turned bitter. No sun. Just clouds so low they looked like they could reach down and scrape the roof of my car. I parked, keyed in the access code, and rolled through the security gate. Unit 207. I remembered because it was the same as the house number of the place Mom and I used to rent before Bram remarried. It took me a few minutes to unlatch the sliding door. Rusted from lack of use, it groaned open like it was mourning something. Inside, the air was musty, old paper, dust, and the faint sweetness of mildew. Boxes stacked neatly, labeled in her careful script. Kitchen. Books. Linens. Then, near the back, in a plastic storage crate marked legal, I found it. A file folder, red, thick, a yellow sticky note on top read, in case Galatia tries anything. My throat went dry. I sat cross-legged on the concrete floor and opened it. Inside was the deed transfer, signed, notarized, dated exactly 1 month before she passed. My name, sole beneficiary, not just of the house, but of the small investment account tied to it. It wasn't some generic template. It was clear, intentional, bulletproof. She had known, all along, not just what Galatea was capable of, but that Bram would let her. I read it 3 times, tracing the letters of my name with my finger like they might disappear if I blinked too fast. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. What showed up instead was heat, the kind that settles in your stomach and doesn't rise, the kind you learn to live with when life hands you betrayal layered as tradition. She knew. She always knew. I snapped out of the daze, took photos of every page, uploaded them to a hidden drive on my phone, then to 2 cloud folders I'd named under unrelated business titles. I wasn't leaving this to chance. Not again. Sliding the folder back into the box, I stood up, brushed the dust off my jeans, and locked the unit behind me. The next stop wasn't planned. I drove through town and passed by the postal annex near Galatea's neighborhood. Something pulled me in. Call it instinct, or maybe just years of being underestimated that taught me how to listen when gut and memory intersected. Inside, the clerk looked up with a polite smile. "Hi, I think I may have lost a certified package around Christmas," I said. "I was wondering if there's any way to check the surveillance footage from that week." He frowned. "Typically, we only access footage for law enforcement requests. But—" He paused, tilting his head slightly. "You look familiar." I didn't blink. "I live nearby." "House on Laurel. Used to be my mom's." He snapped his fingers. "Eulalia's daughter?" I nodded. "I remember her. She was something. Okay, just between us, I'll let you take a peek. Come around." He led me into a small back office. The monitor was ancient, footage grainy, time-stamped in the bottom corner. We skipped through the days until we hit Christmas Eve. "There," I pointed. "Onyx. Same coat, same posture, same envelope." He walked up to the box and dropped it in, looking over his shoulder once before leaving. Nothing illegal in the act itself, but there was something too rehearsed about it. "Can we check 2 days earlier?" I asked. He scrolled back, December 22nd. And there she was, Galatea, picking up a certified letter. She signed the name A. Valmai. The handwriting was a weak disguise, looped letters, uncharacteristic hesitation. "I'd like a copy of that signature if possible," I said. He hesitated. "That one, I might need a formal request." "That's fair." I smiled. "I'll get it." He didn't ask any more questions. I thanked him, walked out, and sat in my car again, heart beating steady now. Not from fear, from focus. They play messy. I play long. I drove home with the windows cracked, cold wind threading through my coat sleeves, keeping me alert. I didn't need heat right now. I needed clarity. Back at my apartment, I pulled out my laptop and created a folder, the Reclaim Project. I laid out the timeline, date of the trust update, date of Galatea's forged pickup, Onyx's envelope drop, Lyra's confirmation of my name still being on the property, line by line, no adjectives, no pain, just facts. Silence doesn't mean absence. I was always watching. That night, as I settled into the rhythm of typing, organizing, labeling evidence, an email arrived. It was from the title search assistant I'd asked to verify ownership. Subject: urgent, property findings. I clicked. "Alethea, I checked the title registry. Something strange. Your name was replaced. 6 months ago. It wasn't legal. There's no recorded notarization or authorization. Whoever did it bypassed standard procedure. You need to act fast." My hand froze on the mouse, not in panic, but in stillness, like I had expected this all along. They didn't just take what wasn't theirs. They did it assuming I wouldn't look, wouldn't fight, wouldn't even notice. But I noticed. And now? Now I keep receipts. It started with a text from Calliope, an old co-worker from the nonprofit. No greeting, no emojis, just 4 words and a link. "You should see this." It was nearly 9 p.m. I was still at my desk, the only light in the apartment coming from my laptop screen and the street lamp flickering just outside my window. I clicked the link, bracing for something, though I didn't know what. The page loaded slow, probably because of the video embedded at the top. Galatea's Christmas Eve party. live streamed, edited, reposted, and now circulating on a local social media roundup page. The footage opened with Onyx standing before the fireplace. The same fireplace where my painting hung, the one I gave our father, the one Galatea claimed credit for. He held a glass of scotch and gave one of his fake charming speeches, the kind he usually reserved for business mixers or fundraising dinners. "Family's complicated," he said, smiling wide. "Some people think they're entitled to things just because their name's on a piece of paper." Laughter. He went on. "Truth is, you can give someone everything, and they'll still act like you owe them more." Then, Galatea's voice chimed in, syrupy and smooth, always perfectly timed. "You can be on the deed and still be a footnote." More laughter. Not polite, not nervous, real. The camera panned out, catching a wide shot of the room, my father smiling, Verity curled next to Galatea, people raising glasses. And above them all, my painting. It was like watching a sitcom you didn't realize was written about you until halfway through the joke. I watched the video again. Not to feel bad, not even to feel angry. I was listening for tone, for precision, for confirmation. They weren't just mocking me, they were rehearsing their version of the story, practicing the lines they would use when this got messier. The next morning, I documented everything, screenshots of comments, timestamped segments, logged who laughed, who clapped, who said nothing. It wasn't about getting them back, it was about building a case, an archive of erasure with receipts. I opened a new file on my desktop. Timeline of humiliation, documented. People always say, "You should let it go." But they never ask why the people who did the damage get to keep the version that benefits them. I thought back to something my mom once told me when I was a teenager. I had come home crying from school after a teacher had publicly questioned whether I had really written an essay that had won a statewide prize. "They make you invisible," she said, brushing my hair back gently, "because they know if you spoke, they'd be exposed." She never said it with bitterness, just fact. Back then, I thought she meant the world outside. I didn't realize she also meant the people at our dinner table. 3 years ago, I was standing in a reception hall downtown, accepting an award for my work with underrepresented teens. It was the first time in my adult life someone had put a spotlight on me for something good, not for being quiet, not for keeping the peace, but for building something that mattered. Galatea hadn't been invited. She showed up halfway through the ceremony. She didn't sit with me. She worked the room like it was hers, and when the MC called for open tributes, she somehow ended up with the mic in her hand. "She's always been brilliant," Galatea had said, feigning humility. "Even as a kid, I knew she had something special. I just tried to help guide her light." She looked straight at me when she said it, as if daring me to interrupt. I didn't. I stood there, smiling with the rest of the room, frozen under their applause. She had hijacked my moment, rewritten it with herself at the center, and I let her. I went home that night, ripped the program in half, and shoved it in the back of a drawer. I hadn't looked at it again. Until now. Now I saw it with new eyes. Every glance, every staged anecdote, every pivot that put her in the position of mentor instead of manipulator. She hadn't stolen that spotlight because she needed it. She stole it because she believed I couldn't hold it. Not anymore. I opened the legal folder on my laptop, renamed it The Long Game. Inside, I dropped everything. Footage, photos, transcripts, that speech clip from the award night, the notarized deed, the forged signature from the post office surveillance. I wrote a short email to my attorney. Subject: ready to move forward. Message: I'm ready to escalate. Please prepare the documents for preliminary injunction. They may attempt to sell or remortgage the property under false claim. I want them blocked. I hit send. They thought silence meant surrender, but silence was how I built my arsenal. Around midnight, I was pouring tea when my phone buzzed with an alert from the security system on my apartment building. Motion detected. Front mailbox. I set the cup down, opened the app. The screen showed the grainy feed from the entry camera. Galatea. She stood in front of my mailbox, face partially obscured by a scarf. She glanced around, then pulled something from her coat and slid it inside. No knock. No text. She walked off without hesitation, disappearing into the dark. I stared at the screen for a moment, then slipped on my slippers, wrapped a scarf around my neck, and headed downstairs. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and unmarked. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper, typed, spaced, formal. "We need to talk, before this gets worse." I read it twice, then folded it, slid it into my jacket pocket, and walked back upstairs. Too late, I thought. You waited for me to break. But I didn't. You should have been worried long before this. The house was one of those older craftsman bungalows with a wraparound porch that seemed to hold memories in the beams. I parked 2 houses down, unsure why I suddenly felt nervous, maybe because part of me had started believing there was nothing left Mom could have done to help. And yet, here I was, standing in front of June Langdon's door, about to be handed a letter that could change everything. June answered on the second knock, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Alethea?" I nodded. "Come in, sweetheart. I've got the kettle on." Her voice was warm, familiar in a way that made my throat tighten unexpectedly. The living room smelled of lemon and old paper. June reached for a wooden box resting on the sideboard and opened it gently, like it might bite. "It was stuffed inside a Christmas card box in my attic," she explained, handing me a sealed envelope. "Your mama must have left it there when she visited the year before she passed." "I meant to clean out that attic last spring, but—" Her voice trailed off. I didn't need her to finish the sentence. Grief made hoarders out of the best of us. The envelope was thick, the handwriting unmistakable. "For Alethea, in case they turn on you." I didn't open it there. I just held it. The weight of it. The proof of intention. June placed a hand on my shoulder. "Whatever's in that letter, she meant for you to have it." Back in the car, I tore the seal slowly, heart thudding. The first lines were careful, almost too careful. "I never knew how to protect you without turning the whole family against me." My eyes blurred, but I kept reading. "I watched them chip away at you, and I stayed quiet. I told myself it was for peace, but I realize now I was just afraid. You deserved better than my silence." "If you're reading this, it means they did what I feared." She had attached photocopies, records of the trust transfer, notes she made about Galatea and Onyx meeting with lawyers without telling me. Her handwriting wobbled near the end. "You are more than the silence they trained you to live inside." I didn't cry. Not right then. But I gripped the letter like armor. It was noon when I pulled into the parking lot at the records office. The fluorescent lights inside buzzed overhead as I waited to meet Lyra's contact, a quiet, older man named Jeremy, who looked more like a retired librarian than a property title expert. "I took a look at your file," he said, flipping through a folder. "What's odd isn't just the forgery, it's how clean it was. They removed your name from county records a week after your mother's funeral. No court order, no authorization on file." He handed me the certified copies of the original deed, signed and dated by Eulalia. "This right here is bulletproof," he said. "You're still the legal owner. Everything they've done since? Fraud." I leaned back, folding my arms. "And Onyx was listed as notary," Jeremy added. "He notarized a transfer where he stood to benefit. That's not just conflict of interest. That's a crime." For the first time in weeks, I felt something like oxygen fill my chest. "They always thought I'd never check," I said aloud. Jeremy smiled, sympathetic but firm. "They thought you'd never fight." I walked out into the late afternoon light, the folder tucked under my arm like a weapon finally unsheathed. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove to the park where Mom used to take me as a kid. The bench by the pond was still there, crooked from age, flanked by 2 bare maple trees. I sat down and let the cold cut through my coat, pulled the letter from my pocket, read it again. Then I opened my email and wrote one final message to Galatea, Bram, and Onyx. "Effective immediately, legal counsel has been retained. Further communication must go through official channels. You are not authorized to act on my behalf or in relation to any property registered under my name. All relevant parties have been notified." No emotion, no bitterness, just truth. I clicked send, blocked their emails, not because I needed distance, but because I no longer owed them access. As the sun dipped behind the trees, I closed my eyes and felt something settle in me. Not peace, not yet, but clarity. That night, as I was folding laundry and sipping lukewarm tea, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I picked up. Alethea, Bram said. His voice was lower than usual, hoarse. I don't know what you're doing, but you need to stop. I stayed silent. Galatea is unraveling. She hasn't eaten in 2 days. Onyx says the press is asking questions. Still, I said nothing. He pressed on, louder now. If this goes to court, we lose everything. That was what he cared about. Not what had been done, not what had been taken, what might be lost if the truth were made public. Maybe, I said slowly, she shouldn't have built her house on lies. There was silence. A breath. Then, Alethea, listen. I hung up. Not in anger, but in finality. I placed the phone face down on the counter and finished folding the towels. They hadn't called when I lost my dignity, or my credit access, or my voice. But now that I had power, now they remembered my name. They called it war. I called it truth. The brunch invite arrived 2 days earlier. An email from the nonprofit board thanking me for my past work, inviting me to a casual community gathering to reconnect. The subject line read, "Let's rebuild together." No agendas, no titles, just coffee, conversation, and gratitude. I stared at the message longer than I should have. At first, I was hesitant. My instinct had always been to keep things professional and separate, especially after what happened the last time I was publicly acknowledged. But something in me stirred. Maybe it was the line about gratitude. Maybe it was because I had nothing left to fear from being visible. I replied yes. By noon, I was stepping inside the community hall near Hawthorne. The space had been set up simply, folding chairs arranged around long tables, string lights overhead, a buffet of catered breakfast. Familiar faces greeted me. Some hugged, others nodded. Then I saw her, Galatea, sitting near the front, chatting with a journalist. I froze, but only for a second. The simmer started in my gut again, but this time it didn't boil, it calcified. I didn't approach, I found a seat in the back. They had invited her. Not by name, probably, but she knew how to sniff out a camera and a microphone. I watched her toss her hair over her shoulder, feign humility. She laughed at something the journalist said, then looked around the room like she was measuring the angles of the spotlight. When they lie for long enough, I thought, they forget who was watching the whole time. Midway through the program, Calliope, one of the earliest volunteers in the nonprofit, stood up at the mic. She cleared her throat and smiled. When I joined the Community Outreach Initiative back in its early days, we were just a few women in a church basement with a whiteboard and duct-taped chairs. The brain behind all of it, the one who drew the blueprint, ran the numbers, knocked on doors, and taught workshops until her voice cracked. That was Alethea Valmai. All eyes turned toward me. I didn't move. Galatea, sitting to the side, lifted her chin. "We both shaped it, didn't we?" she said lightly, interrupting. Calliope didn't flinch. "No, she built it. You marketed it. There's a difference." The room went still. I could feel the tension wrap itself around every person seated. Galatea's smile tightened, but she said nothing. I felt the breath I'd been holding release slowly. For once, I didn't have to defend myself. Someone else had done it, with clarity, with conviction, without theatrics. My hands trembled under the table, not from nerves, but from a new kind of weight, validation. I thought back to the meeting years ago where I'd handed Galatea my first draft of the outreach plan. She'd laughed and told me it was too serious for community work. "You need to smile more, lighten the tone. People don't fund grief." She said it in front of 3 other board members. That night, I went home and rewrote the entire proposal. Now, Calliope had given it a voice again. The second blow came just 10 minutes later. One of the journalists in the room raised her hand and asked, "Wasn't this the same nonprofit mentioned in the Sisters of Service article last year?" Galatea lit up. "Yes, that was such a special piece. It captured our dynamics so well, joint effort all around." The journalist frowned and pulled a printed copy from her folder. "This version only credits Galatea Moreland, no mention of Alethea." The shift in the room was subtle, but I noticed it. Whispers, brows furrowed. Galatea leaned forward. That must have been an editing oversight. The journalist shook her head. We have the original submission. You sent the final copy and the byline was singular. My heart didn't race. I didn't feel rage. Just done. She hadn't wanted credit. She wanted deletion, not just from headlines, from history, from memory, from legitimacy. I looked down at my lap and smoothed the hem of my dress, fingers steady. I didn't need a script. I didn't need a dramatic exit. But I did need to stand. After a moment, I rose and walked quietly to the mic. The room held its breath. I looked around, not at Galatea, but at everyone else. I didn't come here to fight for a spotlight, I began. I came to build something that would outlast me. Calliope nodded from the back. Someone whispered, Amen. I don't need credit for every word, every plan, every sleepless night. I know what I've done. But when someone tries to erase your presence from a table you built, well, silence stops being noble. I turned slightly toward the press row. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to reclaim what I was told I didn't earn. The room was quiet for a beat, then soft applause. A few stood, no ovation, just honest acknowledgement. Galatea didn't move, her mask didn't crack, but she didn't smile either. She sat frozen, as if someone had unplugged her performance. I stepped down, walked back to my chair, and picked up my glass of water. The air felt clearer somehow. After the brunch, I stepped outside and let the cold slap my face back into reality. My phone buzzed. Voicemail. I hit play. Onyx's voice. You really don't know what you're doing. There's more to lose than just property. His tone was flat, but the edge in it was undeniable, like a warning disguised as concern. I listened again, then saved it. You shouldn't threaten someone who's already lived through the worst of you, I said out loud to no one. Because the next time we spoke, it would be in court. I arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early. The sky was still a dull gray, typical for Portland in January, but there was a strange calm in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks over still water. The courthouse loomed ahead, not intimidating, just impersonal, steel and concrete, neutral walls built to host people's worst days. Inside, the lobby echoed with the footsteps of others waiting for their own reckonings. I didn't stop to sit. I went straight to the elevators, took the one that led to the civil courtrooms on the 3rd floor. The envelope with the flash drive was inside my briefcase, pressed flat between layers of printed documents and notarized forms. It wasn't just evidence. It was my mother's last act of courage. I found a bench outside the courtroom and sat. From there, I had a clear view of the hallway. Galatea arrived 10 minutes later, polished navy coat, hair swept back, dark lipstick. Her lawyer flanked her left. Onyx walked on the right, speaking low enough that I couldn't hear, but forcefully enough that even his body language felt like a performance. Bram trailed behind. He looked smaller than I remembered, older, as if all the weight of loyalty to the wrong person had finally pressed his spine into something weaker than pride. None of them looked at me. They came dressed for war, I thought. I came armed with truth. At 9:01, the clerk called us in. The courtroom was modest. Wood-paneled walls, outdated carpet, the faint hum of something electric just behind the judge's bench. Our judge was a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and no patience for drama. We were sworn in. The hearing began. My lawyer, Dana, was precise, calm. She started with the deed, walked through the timeline, the notarized documents, the emails, the surveillance footage. One by one, she built the case. Then came the forged power of attorney. The mysterious title change. The unauthorized notary signature, Onyx's, Galatea's team tried to call it all a misunderstanding between grieving family members. Family confusion, the attorney said. Dana didn't flinch. The confusion only benefited one party, repeatedly, and at the expense of my client. Then Dana handed me the floor. I stood slowly, gripping the folded letter in my hand. I unfolded it with care, smoothing the creases without looking down. This is a letter written by Eulalia Valmai, my mother, I said. It was found in the possession of a neighbor, left with specific instruction. For Alethea. In case they turn on you. I read it aloud. Each word landed with the weight of history. She writes, I said. I stayed quiet. I told myself it was for peace, but I realize now I was just afraid. I didn't read everything. Just enough. Her silence gave them room. Her final words give me ground. Bram shifted in his seat. The judge leaned forward slightly. Do you have supporting evidence? Yes, Your Honor, Dana replied. We have a recorded video made by Eulalia weeks before her passing. It confirms the letter's content, her intent, and her regret. The judge gave a single nod. Proceed. The courtroom dimmed. The screen flickered to life. There she was, Eulalia, hair thinner, skin pale, but her voice steady. If you're watching this, it means they did what I feared, she began. She talked about Galatia's control, about how Onyx had rushed legal paperwork past her while she was medicated, about the moments she chose not to intervene because she didn't want to cause a scene. Then she looked directly at the camera. You deserve better than the quiet I gave you. The house is yours, the account is yours, and I hope this helps you take back what they tried to erase. Silence followed. Onyx stared at the screen, jaw clenched. Galatea didn't blink. Her posture broke, just slightly. She leaned forward as if she could will the words to stop. Bram bowed his head. The judge straightened, then looked at their attorney. Does the defense have a rebuttal? No, Your Honor. This court recognizes the original transfer of ownership, the judge said clearly. All attempted amendments are invalid. Ms. Alethea Valmay retains full legal control of the Moreland property and related assets. Any further interference will result in additional sanctions. An audible gasp rippled through the gallery. From Galatea? I couldn't tell. I didn't look at her. I looked at the judge and nodded once. It was over. Almost. Galatea stood, opening her mouth to speak, but the judge cut her off with a single glance. Counselor, please advise your client to remain silent unless asked to speak. Galatea sat down. Hard. Bram leaned forward toward me as I gathered my papers. I never meant for it to get this far, he said softly. I didn't respond. There is no apology that restores stolen time. Onyx stood behind them, checking his phone, already planning his next exit strategy. Maybe to a board meeting, maybe to the next woman foolish enough to trust him. We left the courtroom in silence, no dramatic exit, just presence and power. Reporters were already waiting outside, cameras low, microphones up. I didn't stop. I walked past them, through the crowd, through the fog of 100 unspoken questions. At the corner, my phone buzzed. A text. From Dana. FYI, Galatea just filed a temporary financial hardship request with her attorney. Wants to protect her other properties from being pulled into your potential civil claim. I smiled. Not bitter, empowered. You wanted me to disappear, I thought, but I became the headline. The house felt heavier when I opened the door. Not haunted, just full, like it had absorbed everything that had happened inside it, and now it was waiting to be unburdened. I stepped over the threshold without hesitation this time. It was mine now. Every corner, every stair that creaked, every nail in the floorboard. But it didn't feel like a victory. Not yet. I walked room to room in silence, the echoes of the last few weeks following me like stubborn shadows. Galatea's shoes were still lined up by the back door. Onyx's cologne lingered in the hallway closet. Bram's jacket, the one he always claimed was too good for donation, was slung over a dining chair like it hadn't lost its meaning. I didn't touch anything right away. I just took stock. They had tried to erase me, but what they left behind said everything. Notes from Galatea to Onyx on sticky paper. Don't forget to change account logins. Grocery receipts signed with initials that weren't mine. Photo frames with only certain people visible, all curated, all sanitized of me. Owning a place doesn't mean it feels like home, I thought. Still, I began clearing things out. Not violently, not emotionally, just a box at a time. Quiet, steady reclamation. By the third box, I turned on some jazz, something old and wordless, and opened the windows. Let the house breathe. Let myself breathe. The next morning, 2 letters arrived. One addressed in Bram's familiar script. one in a child's uneven print. I opened Bram's first. "We all make mistakes," it began, "but you didn't have to take it this far." That was as far as I read before tearing it in two. No apology, just veiled blame, the same tactic wrapped in softer paper. The second letter I opened slowly. A pressed flower slipped out first, faded purple, delicate. The note was short, written in pencil. "I miss you, even if Mom says not to. I think you're brave. Love, Verity." My throat closed. I placed the letter in a small box on the shelf above my desk, the box I'd labeled months ago. Real things. Not everyone in the family was lost, but some bridges shouldn't be rebuilt. I didn't reply, but I kept the flower. A week passed without public announcements, without texts, without more threats. I didn't check headlines. I didn't scroll through Galatia's social accounts to see how she spun it. That wasn't my job anymore. I started spending time at the local library, volunteering in a youth writing program. 12 girls, ages 13 to 17. Sharp, scared, brilliant in ways they hadn't yet learned to say out loud. We wrote stories, real ones, hard ones. I told them, truth is not loud, it just doesn't stutter. They listened. Some nodded. Some cried. The program became more than something to do. It became something I needed, to remember what words could do when they weren't weaponized. I rebranded my nonprofit, gave it a new name. One that didn't carry my family's legacy, but still honored what we'd built before the rot set in. Then, anonymously, I published a short op-ed in a quiet corner of the internet. What power feels like when you've been erased. I didn't attach my name, not because I was ashamed, because I didn't need credit. "I don't want fame," I wrote in my journal that night. "I want peace." On my way to the grocery store a few days later, I passed by the local bookstore. A display near the entrance caught my eye. There she was, Galatea, on the cover of a regional magazine, headline in bold, "What It Cost Me to Lose My Sister." I didn't buy it, didn't even pick it up. Let her speak into the echo chamber, I thought. I've moved on. Later that week, during a session, my therapist asked me, "Do you want to forgive them?" I looked out the window for a while before answering. "No," I said. "But I want to forget needing to." That night, I left the windows open as I slept. No dreams. Just stillness. On my nightstand sat one final envelope, addressed to the rightful owner of 42 Laurel Lane. No return name, no logo, just quiet ink on white paper. I held it in my hand, didn't open it, just placed it in the box with Verity's letter and the pressed flower. Some stories don't need sequels, just silence that no longer hurts.